my days as an early engineer, a lot of it was struggling to just get code written in relatively rudimentary environments, waiting for slow computers, waiting for slow compilers, trying to decipher very strange error messages, etc. The future will belong to the people willing to adapt the way they work and adapt the way they think. They come away completely transformed, and it's like discovering fire or electricity or something. I would argue that it's actually the 7 S's, which is sell, source, sell, screen, sell, secure, and sell again. Embracing the fact that recruiting is marketing and sales, and structuring a lot of the process quite similar to a sales process is actually key.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Albert. Albert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. Excited to be here.
We're pumped to have you here, and I'd love to start where I start with all guests, is just to hear a little bit more about yourself. What are you up to? And who is Albert?
So quickly about me, I'm currently running the engineering team at a company called Rippling. We're kind of in the today most customers know us for the HR, IT, and finance software we build, but the long-term vision is essentially to construct a platform for all business software. So I've been doing this for the last 2.5 years, running the engineering team. We're about 1,000 engineers right now, so it's keeping me on my toes. And then before this, was at Twilio, that acquired a company called Segment that I worked at for about 5.5 years in the customer data space. Before that, a company called Cloudflare. And before that, I was living in South Africa. So been in San Francisco, doing the Silicon Valley thing for about a decade.
And I'd love to hear from you, because this is not something I've experienced. What's the difference between managing 1,000 people versus, 5 or 10 when you're starting out as a manager?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, obviously with smaller teams, there's a lot more opportunity to, really sway the details. When it comes to a 1,000-person team, you still have to be in the details from time to time, but you really have to pick your battles and manage your time carefully. And I guess the other thing with a big team like this is, a lot of it is systems and processes, and to some extent you have to think of this big group as more of a system than a set of individuals. Of course, still, like, every person is unique and special, but sometimes you have to drive it as you would a big distributed system. And so actually interesting to apply some engineering principles to manage or to succeed at this scale.
Awesome. And you mentioned Rippling's kind of longer term vision. I'd like to hear about that, because it sounds really ambitious and exciting.
Yeah, so we started initially building, essentially software in the US market for HR and payroll, and then expanded it with a set of IT offerings. And so that essentially covered a lot of what businesses do day to day with regards to hiring, onboarding employees, making sure they get laptops, making sure they can log into their systems. And then we've expanded since then to support companies headquartered outside of the US. Australia, is a emerging market for us, as is Canada and the UK, and a couple of others. Supporting international hiring, including payment of international employees. And then we have a number of other, kind of like suites under development as well. Been doing a lot of work on spend management, further expanding our IT suite. And then there's some other stuff under development in the data space, coming in the coming months. So, eventually, again, kind of like on this foundation of, critical employee data that you get through HR and payroll, like building a lot of other business applications as well. And I guess one of our key differentiators, I think, is heavy investment in the platform that allows all of these different business applications or tools to integrate and communicate and work better together.
And I'm interested, was that always planned from the get-go? And if so, did that then allow the infrastructure to be set up in a way that made it very easily scalable, as opposed to kind of hacking in new modules on top of something you never really thought would go in that direction?
Yeah, I think if you talk to Parker, our CEO, a lot of this was the vision from the get go. I do think the vision has become grander over time as we've realized the capabilities of that have been unlocked by a lot of this foundational platform work. But yeah, really from the beginning, the goal was one platform, all of the software built on top of that platform. It's a very homogeneous, kind of like unified approach to building software rather than trying to take lots of disparate systems and integrate them after the fact. And so, yeah, I would say a lot of the original vision is intact today, but it's getting grander as well.
That's good. Vision is going up with time, not down through time. It's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, the trend is in the right direction.
Yes. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Has the development of large language models and their use in software engineering allowed some of that grander vision? Is that part of it? That's just now more efficient or easier to build product?
Absolutely. Yes. I think, it's early days, but we're certainly starting to see, improvements in the velocity with which we can develop software generally. And then I think, the essentially having large language models or, AI models generally writing code on top of a well-defined platform works pretty well also, maybe in contrast to essentially having those models write massive systems from scratch, if instead you are essentially writing code or building a system in a more constrained way on top of a set of standard platform components, you can actually get very far very quickly. And so, yes, I think we're benefiting from those advances. Again, early days, still figuring out when, how, where to adopt all of this, but yeah, it's definitely helping.
And do you think that part of the strategy would be to have like really micro services that an AI could really understand at enough detail to kind of be unleashed rather than, a monolithic kind of approach where it's just too much context and too much complexity?
Yeah, I think the thing we're working on actively internally is making sure there's a very clear set of APIs for AI agents or AI technology generally to leverage. And it's remarkable also the degree to which good documentation, either internally or externally, enables these models to make sense of the APIs. And so, to some extent, I think it actually helps to have all of the data models and a lot of the APIs together and work the same, look the same, be documented the same. And then, with a bit of guidance, you can then get, your LLMs or your reasoning models or your agents to operate on top of these systems. So, yeah, that's how we're approaching it.
Now, you started out your career as a software engineer, is that right?
Yeah, so spent a whole bunch of years writing code, and then kind of found my way into the like technical leadership realm, and then the kind of like tech lead manager to manager of managers and up from there.
I'm really interested then. So imagine if you were starting your career again now, would you still think about engineering in the same way? Would you learn different things? Are there certain things you think are going to be almost irrelevant in a few years? Like, how would you think about being a junior software engineer again?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think many things will likely still be the same, but I think probably almost the way that a junior engineer is going to be spending their time early on, um, as I look a few years ahead, might be quite different. If I think about my days as an early engineer, a lot of it was struggling to just get code written in relatively rudimentary environments, waiting for slow computers, waiting for slow compilers, trying to decipher very strange error messages, etc. Like a lot of that stuff was really just like a drag on getting work done. And so I think the kind of like mechanical or like work of just getting code written. I think a lot of that stuff is going away. But at the same time, I think there's, a lot of these tools, they will obviously get smarter over time and, write less bugs. But I do think you can also very quickly code yourself into a corner or a cul-de-sac now. And it is becoming maybe more important than ever that, new engineers really understand, more about the system end to end, like really understand the full stack, so that they can effectively leverage these AI tools to build with. And so, to some extent, it is very dangerous not to understand the things underneath the abstraction layers you leverage to build software. And so, I think, maybe now more than ever, going deep, understanding operating systems, understanding networks, some of these things will become critical, as small groups of people or individuals build, ever more complex systems, very quickly using AI. So I think some of the foundational principles are the same, but some of the mechanics will be much simpler or much faster going forward.
Which is great because we can make a lot more useful software much more productively to solve more problems.
Absolutely. No, I'm very excited about just having spent a bit of time in the last few weeks writing some code here. I was just amazed, an editor like Cursor, just the amount of work you can get done, in a couple of hours. Also leveraging some other tools to generate pull requests, writing little tools. I really think the AI the tools shine for letting you write other tools right now. And so it's really quite remarkable how fast you can move.
Is there going to have to be then a slight mindset shift? Let's say like a reasonably seasoned software engineer has been doing it for 20 years, an individual contributor who kind of views themselves as a coder, but now that is the very bit that's maybe being taken away, or they're now going to prompt an AI more than write the code themselves. There's going to have to be a mindset shift to think of yourself more as a problem solver or a product builder or, I don't know, customer pleaser or something else.
I think there's definitely a mindset shift there. I think likely also, part of the mindset shift is really just embracing, English or French or German or whatever your language of choice is as the new programming language. In the same way as 20, 30 years ago, people were, I guess, not punch cards anymore, but writing assembler or low-level C. That happens less and less. In the side now, I think English and German and French and all of the other languages are almost going to be the lingua franca. So I think that's maybe one shift, is just figuring out how, with the help of a model, to do more programming in English. And then talking to some folks, there's still definitely as with any major technological shift, I think a lot of folks clinging somewhat fearfully to the old ways of doing things. I think back to the days where we had kind of like old school editors, and we moved to integrated development or development environments. A lot of people kind of clung to their old tools for a while. Yeah, exactly. And so, I think, the future will belong to the people willing to adapt the way they work and adapt the way they think. So, definitely some change is coming, and hopefully most people will embrace it.
Yeah, I figure that because the magnitude is so large and the speed is so fast, that you would have to be a very stubborn person to not go, oh, well, I should probably at least start playing around with these tools. You know what I mean? It's like a slap in the face, the change that's happened.
Yeah, it is surprising. I mean, I'm still encountering, seasoned engineers that have not made the hour or two to really kind of like understand what this technology is about. But then, once someone sits down, and it's almost always like, the thing you need to do on a quiet Thursday or a Saturday morning or something. But I feel like the average engineer, having spent that half a day kind of like forcing themselves to, leverage these tools or to embrace these tools, like they come away completely transformed. And, it's like discovering, fire or electricity or something. There's just like no going back. But I think lots of people struggle to click over into like leveraging the new technology, or another failure mode is trying it quickly and it doesn't quite live up to all of the hype, or you have to hold it a little carefully to get what you need, and not embracing the fact that the stuff isn't perfect either. There's margin for error, and you have to use it just right. But people that spend a bit more time to kind of like get over that hump, they are fundamentally changed as engineers.
Yeah, I think also maybe if you'd used some earlier versions of, I don't know, a ChatGPT model for X and it had failed miserably, even with a fair bit of effort, then you've kind of written it off in your head because you're not used to technology improving so quickly that even a few months later, that same use case is now kind of solved for.
It's been remarkable seeing the progress of the OpenAI models and Google's Gemini as well, which I've been using quite a bit in deep research mode. Is like how far we've come, in 6 to 12 months. It's really quite remarkable. So yeah, if you have a value cached from last year, you need to invalidate that cache ASAP and run again.
I love that analogy. What about when it comes to hiring then? So I'm interested actually now in your hiring philosophy. Do you explicitly evaluate, I don't know, AI skills or AI willingness or anything like that? Does that get incorporated?
Yeah, so at Rippling, we're in the process of incorporating AI tools into a lot of the technical interviews, and so that's rolling out right now. Um, we're taking a reasonably like careful and thoughtful approach, but the kind of like main work we did over the last couple of months was essentially define AI extensions or kind of amendments to a lot of our existing interviews. And so the step one was essentially giving candidates a choice between solving with AI tooling or without. I think probably within the next couple of months we'll start requiring the use of AI tools. But we wanted to gather a bit of data first on things like interview pass rates before we fully rolled this out. But a big forcing function for us actually was seeing the rise in essentially like AI tools helping interviewers game the interview process. And so realized pretty quickly it's kind of a losing battle. Like it doesn't make sense to try and box out AI, and it's almost like some candidates are going to use it whether you want them to or not, and so much better to just embrace this future and incorporate it into the process. And so I think with everyone else, we're learning what a effective interview involving AI tools for engineering will encompass exactly. But we're rapidly moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think part of the difficulty has also been it's quite difficult to say to candidates, oh, hey, don't use AI during the hiring process. But day one of the job, oh, you better be using AI because you need it to be productive. It was a difficult inconsistency.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't make sense. And I think, as you said too, the like right now, using AI, ahead of any kind of interview, whether it's with Rippling or another company, I think is a good sign. It points to a healthy amount of curiosity and willingness to learn and willingness to change your mind. Which is probably a key to success for really any engineer and probably like any knowledge worker, really. And so I think right now, finding candidates that have embraced a lot of these new tools is probably a good sign. So we're looking for that specifically.
Yeah, I agree in aggregate. Last time we were hiring, I found a couple of use cases of AI from candidates that I thought, I'm not sure that's to their benefit. And so I wanted to run them by you to see what you think. So one was as part of our process, we had a couple of questions that we asked them, kind of like in an application stage. And one of them was, oh, hey, imagine it's your first day at Aluba. What are the top three things you need from us to give you the best chance of success? And I think the majority of candidates clearly just copied and pasted that into ChatGPT and gave us back what ChatGPT answered, which I kind of thought, not great, because I don't care about what a large language model needs. I care about you as an individual human and your needs. Like, I need to pick up the kids from school at 3 p.m. was kind of what I was imagining they would say, like those kinds of things. And they didn't. And that was kind of a drag. What do you think of that particular example?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, still a place for good human judgment. And I think, when people apply large language model output, in these places, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And so I think a good interview process that involves AI tools, probably gives the humans some opportunities to show off their ability to use the tools, and then some opportunity to show off their own critical thinking. And so one has to strike a balance between those two. And I think someone that doesn't know when to use their own brain versus the machine, that's probably more of a problem, as you noted. So totally agree. You kind of need to assess for both.
The other one I feel like maybe is doing a disjustice or disservice to candidates at the moment is just the, hey, ChatGPT, here's this job description, write me a resume that matches this perfectly, and then sub in my name for it, and then applying with almost like fiction, which is kind of seems as though it's breaking a lot of hiring processes at the moment, because companies are saying, "Oh, I'm getting all these amazing looking resumes. They look perfect, almost too good to be true." In the first interview, it is too good to be true because it's really not the right candidate. Like, that can't be the right way to use it either, I don't think.
Yeah, no. I've seen something similar with AI generated cover letters. And so it used to be that I would actually be quite excited if a candidate took the time to write a cover letter. But now, if I see that it is clearly, AI generated, uh, that's kind of disappointing. And it's still, I think, a candidate that takes time to write a smart, clever, like, thoughtful, kind of like from the heart cover letter about why a specific opportunity is a match for them. I think that's great, but AI generated dribble is pretty like useless and disappointing. So again, a good opportunity to apply some judgment with regards to do I do this with an AI tool or not? Clearly, if you clearly know you're trying to connect with a human on the other side in the form of the hiring manager, whose job you're applying to, like, put some human, effort into that cover letter, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be worth it. And if nothing else, if everyone else who's applying has the same job description and is using 90% of the time the same large language model to write a resume, how different is your resume going to look to everyone else's? It's like the opposite of sales and marketing. Got to stand out somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in the same way as I'm sure we're all drowning in AI generated, spam marketing emails, you're essentially joining that pile of junk by AI generating all of the things you send in when you're applying. So hopefully we'll kind of like pull out of this dive eventually, and people will learn to strike a good balance.
Uh, Last time we chatted, you'd mentioned something quite interesting that I'd love to hear more about, and that is that, as part of hiring, sometimes you're presenting like a pitch deck to the candidates, or like a slide deck to the candidates to, I guess, market and sell the role and the company a bit more. I'd love to hear more about that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was looking this up earlier. So there's something called the 4 S's of recruiting, which is source, screen, sell, and secure. So source is essentially finding the candidates. Screening is figuring out if they're a good fit for the role. Sell is convincing them, and then securing is kind of like getting to yes on the kind of like final decision or getting the offer accepted. I would kind of argue that it's actually the 7 S's, which is sell, source, sell, screen, sell, secure, and sell again. And so I really think there is a lot of sales that needs to go into this process. I mean, especially thinking about engineering roles right now, the market is as competitive as ever. And so, there's selling like at the very front, thinking about your company's brand, the employer brand, raising awareness with candidates about what you're up to. It's LinkedIn, blog post, meetups, etc. There's more selling when you've met the candidate initially, but you want to get them excited for the big push through a set of on-site interviews. I think there's more selling as you get them to the offer stage, and then finally there's even more selling we found in some geographies where candidates will accept an offer, but there's a long notice period, and they might wander off to another job, and so you need to keep engaging or re-engaging them all the way through until they've started. And so I really think one has to think of the recruiting process as there is evaluation, of course, but there is a lot of selling that goes into every step of that. And so something I did at Twilio, but I've done at large scale at Rippling as well, is essentially build a marketing deck explaining to candidates what's the company, what are we building, what are we doing, or how are we doing financially, and a whole bunch of other details about your upcoming launches and exciting projects. I think even when you're a well-known decacorn, many people don't necessarily know what the company does exactly, or they might assume a bunch of things about the company that aren't exactly right. One of the examples for Rippling is we are just an HR company, and so that's a meme I have to fight with regularly. Helping people understand, hey, it's not just HR; it's an entire massive like enterprise business software platform, and so it really helps to have some a picture is worth 1,000 words on this stuff, and so having some slides ready to walk candidates through I found incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and I feel like in a lot of traditional hiring processes, it's very hard to build trust. And I can just think of some of the companies I've interviewed with over the years, and some that I unfortunately for myself joined, where you kind of have a conversation with someone in an interview and they say whatever, and that's never really written down or committed to anywhere. And so at least having something to take away that's written down, it's like, this is exactly what we're doing, that kind of reinforces the message that must then come across in the various stages of the hiring process is also quite helpful, because you start on such a distrust, actually, and almost increasingly so in hiring these days, I think, where there's so many companies complaining about fake CVs and so many candidates complaining about fake jobs. Like, the starting point of distrust is quite bad. And so any way you can win that back, I think, is great.
Yeah, I think there's distrust. I also think there's a huge information asymmetry. The candidate, the hiring manager doesn't necessarily understand the candidate's motivations. The candidate essentially had a one-page job description. They don't really know what they're applying to until they get much further into the process. And so I think there's a lot you can do, when a recruiter initially talks to a candidate, or very early on when a hiring manager talks to a candidate, just to get on the same page, set the record straight. I think it can actually save a lot of time later. You can detect mismatched expectations much earlier by getting it all out there. I also think something that has served us well is we're generally quite transparent about how the business is doing. And, luckily for us, the business is doing quite well. But I think speaking both to the technical challenges and the state of the business has been very helpful with candidates as well. So we share quite openly, and again, to your point, that builds a lot of trust early on, and so something I would recommend if at all possible.
Yeah, for sure. And all my experience in being either opaque or very transparent, especially early on in the process, suggests to me that, yeah, it wins candidates over so quickly. I can remember learning a lot from a company we worked with a few years ago called Get Your Guide, who are a travel site based in Europe. And at the application stage, they were aggressively transparent in terms of, again, that written documentation, like a day in the life of this role, LinkedIn links to your teammates, what exactly the team's currently working on, what the KPIs are, the share option plan, the exact valuation, like all these things. It makes it chalk and cheese when a candidate's used to just a JD that's kind of generic and a laundry list of tools. and suddenly like, oh, cool, you've answered every question I would have had in that first interview anyway. So then they can opt out if they're not interested, or they're just ahead of the game and they're now really excited. So it's such a, to me, seems like a pretty low hanging piece of fruit in terms of improving the whole hiring process, just to offer them more information earlier.
Exactly, and that's some of the feedback I've often gotten from candidates on these calls. When I get to the end and I say, any other questions for me? They frequently say, "Wow, you just answered absolutely everything." And I think it's also a pretty efficient use of time. So you can squeeze a lot into thinking about an initial call, 30, 40 minutes, meeting the candidate, understanding their background. There's a lot you can say about a company and an opportunity in 20 minutes. And so, especially if you have prepared it and it's, you're not trying to paint pictures with words, you actually have the pictures ready to go and you move through them quickly. So yeah, it's been a critical tool for me.
Yep. And of course, another big bit of hiring is just the evaluation and choosing the right candidate. You'd mentioned last time we chatted about project deep dives. So, like getting the candidates to talk about something they'd already done in the past and really digging in there. I'd love to hear again more about that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think a high-level guiding principle for me, with the past project deep dive interview and really just like the technical interviewing we're doing generally is give the candidate the best chance to show off their skills, right? And so it is generally trying to steer away from, gotcha questions or things that are overly theoretical. And so what we do with the past project deep dive is, we essentially, the recruiter works with the candidate, prepares them for the interview. We ask them to come and tell us about one or two major initiatives they've worked on, to explain both the technical and the business goals, the challenges they encountered and the solution. And then I think importantly also, we asked them to tell us what role they played, and it doesn't necessarily mean they had to have played, the utmost leadership role or leading role in the project. We really just want them to tell us in as much detail as possible about what they did very specifically. And then that's a great, kickoff point to ask a bunch of questions to understand how they operate, understand how they think about problems, dig into their ability to, self-reflect on, things that went well, things that didn't go well, things they learned, etc. But it's really helpful to have, at the center of that conversation, a project that the candidate is deeply familiar with. And so, it's a very, like real discussion instead of being something theoretical. Is, what would you do in this theoretical situation? It's more about what did you do in this actual situation, and so yeah, big fan of that interview. We do something very similar. The past project deep dive we do pretty lightweight. We ask that people not prepare slides or only prepare a slide or two from their side. We do something very similar with more senior manager candidates, where we do actually ask them to prepare a presentation with 5 to 10 slides. The nice thing about that is you also get to test their ability to communicate to a group. And so for that interview, we'll actually have 3 or 4 people attending the presentation, and so it's kind of like a past project deep dive in full presentation form. Again, I think a very helpful interview, and we gather a lot of signal that way.
I imagine one challenge with that approach would be, because each candidate, of course, has their own projects, then these interviews can almost go in any direction, as opposed to maybe, oh, here's this one question, we're going to ask every candidate the same question, or we're going to give them the same take-home project with our data or whatever. How do you deal with that variability in being able to still compare the performance?
Yeah. So we do a bit of preparation. So the recruiter will generally share a standard kind of like structure for the presentation. For the manager one, we'll say, hey, we want you to describe the business problem at a high level. Then we want you to describe the system that was built in some technical detail. Then we want you to reflect on what went well, what went poorly, or what you would do differently next time, and along with a few other pieces. And so it has been helpful to have some scaffold or structure so that every candidate isn't kind of like spinning the whole thing from scratch. But then inside of that, you do need interviewers that are a little adaptable. We try and keep the interview reasonably interactive too. So we'll have interviewers interjecting with questions during the presentation from time to time, or with the past project deep dive. It is very much a two-way conversation. So you do need, I'd say well-trained or experienced interviewers conducting that can kind of like roll with the punches or think on their feet a little bit. But the nice thing with the interview one as well is, if you have 2 or 3 people attending the presentation, they can also kind of like feed off each other's questions. And so, yeah, it takes a bit of work to dial this in. But I think once, you've practiced a bit and, once your organization is trained on, rolling with the punches with a past project deep dive style interview, it's super high signal.
I guess also there is actually a consistency in the sense that from each interviewer's perspective, each candidate they speak to, they're coming in fresh. They don't know anything about this project. The person's talking about it. So you're always kind of starting at zero on a level playing field, even if each project is then different.
Exactly. And I think, a key thing you're evaluating too is, how effectively can the candidate ramp you up to a decent level of understanding on the problem. It generally is a good way to assess their, again, ability to communicate, their ability to manage or lead or, explain things. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. You start from nothing, and then, it's nice to reflect, after an hour, like, hey, what do I understand now? What did I learn? Did this person like bring me along for the ride successfully? And, again, you would expect them to do a very good job of that. If they knew what was up, and because it was something they presumably worked on very closely themselves.
Yeah, and if I can think back to some of my own interviews that I've done as an interviewer, I've sometimes gotten lost when the candidate's describing some project to me, and I sometimes thinking like, is this me? Like, am I missing a point here? Is it me who's not really heard this properly? But then, if you have this consistent style of interview, then after a while, well, I understood 9 out of 10 of them, and the 10th, I have no idea what this person is talking about. So probably I know where the issue is.
Exactly.
What about in terms of like the overall hiring pipeline, the kind of funnel that you go through? Um, uh, are there particular metrics you're trying to optimize for? Is it like a speed to hire? Is it a quality of hire in terms of how long the person stays? Do you have any kind of concept of that? Like what are you trying to hit when you're setting up the process?
Yeah, I think in things so at Segment, which is the company that got acquired by Twilio, and so I joined when we were maybe 140 people, and then we grew to about 1,000 total before we got acquired. In the early days of building the engineering team there, we looked a lot at number of interview hours per hire. And so, and you can obviously imagine you do some interviewing that doesn't lead to an on-site or an offer, or somebody even accepting an offer. And so that was one interesting metric we looked at, just to help us understand how efficient we were being with our hiring process. And there's a few things that can almost like cause you to not grade well on that metric. I think one is if you are very indecisive early on in your hiring process, you'll actually push a lot of candidates to later in the pipeline, and then eventually say no to them, wasting a lot of time in the process. And so I think the one thing this metric drives is more decisiveness, kind of like pushing a lot of that to as early in the funnel as possible. Another way you get dinged on that one is if you spend a lot of time with candidates but you struggle to close them at the end, again, it leads to a lot of time wasted. And so it's a nice kind of like general purpose metric, I think, for assessing the health of a pipeline. Something we look at rippling for some of the higher volume roles is, we have lots of engineering teams, lots of departments or sub-departments inside of engineering. What we look for, to essentially assess consistency across the entire organization is just pass-through rates of various interviews. And so generally when we see a too high pass-through rate, probably generally indicates some kind of issue with the interview question, might mean we need to go and refine it. If we see a too low pass-through rate with the interview question, might indicate some kind of, again, problem where it's too hard, or, what the rubric is unclear or something like that. And then similarly where it's, questions being conducted by specific interviewers, again, a hiring manager, for example, any kind of like deviation from the norm, where, either pass rates too high or too low might mean someone is too selective, or they, are letting everybody through, which again can lead to, time wasting downstream. So just, I guess the benefit of a very large team is you can kind of like look for outliers or deviations from the norm. So something we look at pretty closely. And then, we're in the early stages of, rolling out some assessment of the quality of hire as well. I think we're going to launch soon a survey, kind of like at the 90-day mark, where the managers are essentially reporting back on, whether the person that was hired to their team is successful or not. So it can take a little while to figure that out. And so, somewhere between 90 and 180 days is probably when you know for sure.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm always interested when I speak to people running like high scale, high growth teams and companies that are growing really quickly. The level of sophistication in how you approach hiring is pretty high, like in terms of the setup, the structure, the metrics, the thought process, reasonably data driven, very structured. If you were in a much smaller company, or one that's maybe not quite as advanced in their hiring approach, and there's people there who are used to hiring in a more kind of ad hoc, hey, I'm going to just have a chat to this candidate and kind of get a feel for them. And, in Australia, we used to call it like a pub test almost. You go for a beer with them and, get a sense of who they are as a person. What are they missing in that kind of willy-nilly, unstructured, purely intuitive gut feel approach? What are they missing by not having a more rigorous, well thought out, objective, data driven approach, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think, consistency is probably the key here, right? And so, I think there is still, even at our scale, there's a decent amount of flexibility in how candidates get into the process in the first place, right? Some people apply, some people, a sourcer reaches out and they're immediately ready to interview. Other people take a long campaign of convincing and, going to the pub or the park or whatever to get them on board until the process really starts. But I think, whether you're a small company or a big company, it's almost like once the process starts, it's really important to have a consistent set of interviews. And, it's also about, if spending time efficiently there. I think, if you have the same 4 or 5 interviews, you can learn a lot about a candidate in about 4 or 5 hours. That's roughly my guideline for the amount of time you have to spend with an engineer, for example, to really assess their technical skills. And I think thinking about kind of like early stage hiring at some of the companies I was at, before that consistency came in, there were skipped steps or things done out of order, and it almost invariably led to some kind of bad outcome, right? You would get to the end of a process with a candidate and they wouldn't really understand the role yet, and now they're trying to evaluate like your opportunity versus someone else's, and you're struggling to close them because you went too fast, or you get to a debrief and you can't really make a decision about the candidate even because there's like major holes in your understanding. So you have to go back to the candidate and ask for more interviews, which obviously is a terrible candidate experience. And so I think it's almost like no matter how big or small you are, like having at the core of the interview process a few consistent steps is really critical just to get to a decision. And then again, how you close the candidate. Like, there's 100 different ways to get to the final decision once you've decided that you want to hire them. And that's where you should apply a lot of creativity and lots of different approaches, I think. But that core has to be consistent. Otherwise, you frequently struggle to make good decisions.
Yep, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Albert, if you had the opportunity to ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, maybe curious about their one lesson that they've learned in the years that has made them successful. It's always good to hear from other folks. What tips or tricks or guidelines they have. So yeah, always open to hearing about someone's top one tip for success in recruiting. So
I will level that at our next guest at some point next week. If I were to ask you that, is there something off the top of your head which springs to mind for you?
I think embracing the fact that recruiting is marketing and sales, and structuring a lot of the process, quite similar to a sales process, is actually key. Of course, you are trying to evaluate candidates, but I think a lot of people fall down when they forget the selling portion of the recruiting process, and so that's kind of it was a big unlock for me personally, is just embracing the sales part of this. So I think that's kind of my top one tip.
Top one tip, can't argue with that. That's they're the ones you really need to listen to. So for sharing that one, Albert, and for sharing so many of your thoughts and experiences today. It's been such an easy and enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Tim.